Just a 1 minute warning that we'll do roll call. If the clerks could send a note out on the Hangout to members of council to alert them that we'll be starting very shortly. Sorry, as usual, just getting all of our various systems online here. I was begging council's understanding yesterday that your mayor has 4 different devices and screens to work from to make virtual meetings work, which on a good day is easy. And today's going to be a good day, as long as you give me a minute to make sure I've got all this working. Promise I'll quit stalling here in a second. Okay. So I will call this meeting back to order, which is technically a continuation of a council meeting that started on Monday, and it is for the sole purpose of now dealing with item, sorry, I don't have that selection sheet in front of me. 6.5, which is to hear from the Police Commission and the police on current events, and to give us an opportunity to ask some questions. We have I'll have some comments from the chair around that in a moment, but I'll start with roll call. Then I do have a protocol item to do, and then comments from the chair, and then we'll turn it over to the delegation that's here. So, but first order of business is to welcome members of members of the public who are tuning in on the live stream. We are making best efforts to make our proceedings of City Council transparent through virtual means, and so we thank you for tuning in. In person here in Chambers, I have Councillor Banga. Good morning.
Good morning.
Virtually, I believe, Councillor Cartmel.
Good morning.
Good morning. Councillor Katarina, I see you there.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Councillor Zadek on the line.
Good morning.
Good morning. Councillor Essinger, I see you
Good
there.
morning.
Good morning. Councillor Hamilton on the line.
Good morning.
Good morning. Councillor Henderson, I see you there.
Morning.
Good morning. Councillor Knack.
Good morning.
Good morning. Councillor McKean.
Good morning.
Good morning, and you got a lot on your plate this week, so thank you for making time for this. Councillor Nicol.
Morning.
On the line, thank you. Good morning. Councillor Paquette.
Good morning.
I see you there. Councillor Walters is here in person. Good morning. And so we have full attendance. The protocol item, I just have to pull up. Concerns Pride. Like many events this summer, Edmonton's vibrant two-spirit, lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and queer community will mark Pride in more intimate settings during COVID. But pandemic or not, the community's hard-fought wins, as well as its ongoing fight, must not and cannot be forgotten. In fact, it was the Stonewall riots in New York City's Greenwich Village neighborhood, which incidentally marks its 51st anniversary later this month, that are hailed as one of the historic milestones that led to the modern fight for justice and equality in the U.S. and elsewhere in the world. So while our Pride celebrations are a little more private this summer, allow me and my fellow City Council members to wish Edmontonians a happy and fabulous Pride. I'm happy to note that in addition to our Pride crosswalks and Pride bus, this Saturday, June 13th, the high-level bridge will be lit accordingly in rainbow to mark Pride Month. And in addition, as Mayor, I am honored to make it official with the following proclamation. Whereas Edmonton is home to a vibrant two-spirit, lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and queer community, and whereas Pride Month recognizes the challenges our 2SLGBTQ+ communities have had and continue to have in their fight for their rights, and whereas we recognize the intersectional impact of systemic discrimination experienced by queer and trans, Black, Indigenous, and people of color in our community, and whereas we learn from history that Pride is rooted in the powerful voices of people of color, and whereas Edmonton is proud to stand with our 2SLGBTQ+ community and to continue working together to achieve a future where gender and sexual diversity is celebrated and recognized so that all members of society can be treated with dignity and respect. Therefore, I, Mayor Don Iveson, do hereby proclaim June 2020 Pride Month in Edmonton, Alberta's capital city. Thank you. So then, shifting to the business at hand, by way of comments from the chair about the next item of business concerning policing and public safety, and in light of questions raised continent-wide and right here about systemic injustices and racial bias within our civic institutions, all of them, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that what we will be discussing today will be uncomfortable. But discomfort is a critically important feeling to feel in light of the calls for a more profound justice than we have yet achieved. We are here to discuss nothing less important than how we can better ensure the felt sense of safety and inclusion for all Edmontonians, including and especially Black, Indigenous, and people of color's confidence or lack thereof in institutions meant to serve all of our people. We are hearing complaint about how City Council currently and in decades past has tried to achieve community safety. And it is not just a discussion that begins or ends with the police and the Police Commission. When I asked the police more than a week ago to come to today's meeting, it was originally to get an update from them on any and all of their work related to community inclusion and working with Black Lives Matter and the broader community in addressing the concerns that we were hearing even then. Since that time, however, we have had unprecedented peaceful protests and an unprecedented abundance of constituent correspondence, and I must add that we've also heard concerns even yesterday from community members who wanted to come and address council today at this council meeting. And I want to assure community members that council is eager to hear from them directly, and that a public hearing to test ideas and make sure we are hearing the many unique voices and suggestions correctly must be part of our path forward, and that must happen very soon. I acknowledge that most of us in positions of power in this room are white, and that folks directly impacted by our ongoing decisions on this issue are, in many cases, minorities in our community and people of color. And this means that we need and want community input, because it is our job to listen to community members directly affected by this issue, and we will continue to ensure that there will be opportunities in the very near future and always for City Council to hear from our community. We can only represent you effectively if we can hear you clearly, and if we listen and challenge our own biases, and we will share space for that as soon as possible. To be clear, the course of change and the complexity of working through it responsibly does not come and go with this one meeting. Today, Council will hear from the police service itself, as well as its Civilian Oversight Commission. And though the reporting structures are Byzantine under provincial legislation, we will do our best to cut through that, to get answers here and in the coming days and weeks to the hard questions that the public has put before their elected council. As I've said before, I have personally been doing a lot of reflection and thinking about how to address the very real fact that certain communities feel over-policed and underprotected within our current safety models. And I need to acknowledge that my bias for most of my life has been that police made me feel safe. And I now get more fully that that is not the case for everyone in Edmonton. And so I am doing my best to acknowledge my own bias, while also focusing on a core value that I hold dear as part of the reason why I entered this line of work, which is that I believe that every Edmontonian deserves to feel safe in their community. And they deserve to have equitable opportunities to thrive in their community, consistent with what we've said over and over again through End Poverty Edmonton and innumerable other initiatives. And those are the lenses and the values that I will enter today's discussions with. Now, it's not for me to presume what lenses, values, and biases each of the 13 members of this council will bring to these important questions, but I do believe that this council agrees and has acted many times from the idea that we would rather build communities and invest in people than react to unmet need. But we are hearing clearly that we should go further in that as a city and as a society, and deliver a more just, preventive, inclusive policy to building a healthy and safe city. Indeed, Frederick Douglass has been invoked many times around this table for offering the wisdom that it is easier to build strong children than to repair broken, he said men, I'll say people. And so with that, by way of introductory comments, I will turn it over to Chair Mickey Ruth from the Edmonton Police Commission, who will introduce her colleagues and in turn hand off to Chief McPhee, who will introduce his colleagues. Welcome and thank you for being here. Go ahead, Chair Ruth.
Thank you. And first, thank you for having us here. We really appreciate the opportunity to address council and through you to address the public. I have with me here the Executive Director of the Police Commission, Matt Barker, who is behind me and off screen. I first want to acknowledge that on the part of the Police Commission, we absolutely know that policing must change. We have known that for a while and we're committed to it. The Commission recognizes the need for change in almost every role that policing does, how they interact with society, how they interact with the communities, how they interact with each other, how they see each other, and how the community sees them. This is a profound change, and we know it has to happen. In recent days, we've been hearing a lot about proposed change, and a lot of what we see and where we are going is in alignment with that. And that's going to be talked about later today. Policing is something that, especially in Edmonton, we want to see as something that is done with the community. It's something that's done for the community, and it's not something that's done to the community. That requires a transformational change. And the way that the Commission has started that change is in 2018, we had the opportunity to hire a new chief. And we very specifically went out to hire somebody who is a proven change agent, a thought leader in policing. We researched it. We spoke with the community. We got feedback. We had speakers come in to educate us about the future of policing, where we needed to go, where we are right now, and what we needed to do to have the police service have this level of transformational change. And as a result, we hired Chief McPhee. Chief McPhee knows that it's not enough to nibble around the edges. We know it's not enough to nibble around the edges. The changes that we make have to be large and be sustainable. We can't just have better numbers and report better numbers and higher stats. We have to have better outcomes. And those better outcomes have to work for the community. And those better outcomes are going to reduce the calls for service. We have to reduce the calls for service, and we have to do that through the community involvement. And we have to make a lot of the changes there. So we are committed to that. We have a change agent. We are supporting that change agent. An awful lot of the change has already been put in place. You're going to hear about some of that today. We have a long way to go. We're not there yet. But we are absolutely committed as a commission to make sure that we are focused on the way forward and that we get there. So with that, and to go into more detail about what these changes may mean and the focus of the police service, I'd like to turn it over to Chief McPhee.
Thank you, Chair Ruth. Your Worship, a copy of my notes and an information package will be provided to all of Council for their information, obviously for some of the things you discussed after we speak today.
And can it be provided to the city clerk so
Absolutely.
It can be added to the meeting record and publicly available as well?
Absolutely.
Perfect, thank you.
Yep. I want to introduce my team that's in-house with me today in Council Chambers. First of all, I have my Executive Director, Justin Crickler, who runs our legal division. I have my Executive Director, Inino Carey, who runs my Value and Impact division. And I have Deputy Chief Darren Durko, who's HR within our service. And then I have my other deputies and support team on the line should we get into in-depth in questions. I want to mention a couple things about my team. Justin, myself, and Anina are all new within the last 14 months. Deputy Chief Durko is my newest deputy, and he should be able to provide perspective if Council wishes to hear the differences between then and now. I want to take a minute to thank the entire Police Commission for giving me the opportunity to lead this organization. Regardless of times we're in, I'm proud and humbled to lead such a great organization of professionals. I also want to take a minute to recognize the Police Commission. I've been around policing for a long time, and I can say openly and honestly, this is the most diverse commission representing the city that I have ever spoken to or worked with, and I have engaged with many. Volunteers who take their duty seriously, as does Council, yet facing considerable criticism for doing great work at a difficult time. For this, I commend you. I want to thank Mayor Iveson and Council for the opportunity to speak here today. I'd like to echo the words that the Mayor mentioned. This is an uncomfortable time. I actually would say it's on the uncomfortable space that we need to be in right now, because it's the uncomfortable space that will make us and help us make the right decisions going forward. So to start, let's be clear. Like I've stated, and I want to state again, and I want to make sure this is on public record always. The murder of George Floyd was unwarranted, criminal, and like many of you, absolutely made my stomach sick. The horrific incident taking place in the United States puts a shadow on every police officer in most of the world, from the UK to Canada. I will make a few statements that I believe we all should be making up front. 1, systemic racism has existed for many years and dates back before anybody in this room or on the phone. 2, although we have done considerable work in this area, much work needs to be done. This work needs to be done, and we cannot miss the opportunity. 3, the tragic incident of George Floyd must be the catalyst of real, meaningful change. Now I want to step back, and I want to first urge caution and calm. We collectively need to make decisions that won't leave us in a worse place than when we started. A position where we make decisions that do not change the outcomes that we are striving for. Outcomes that slowly focus only on race and ethnicity versus the risk factors that are overrepresented in all of our minority and marginalized populations, that can actually change the status quo and help people live an equal, fair, and equitable life within the city of Edmonton and throughout Canada. Chair Ruth mentioned that when I was recruited, it was to drive change within the Edmonton Police Service. This is exactly why I took the job, and actually before I accepted the job, I looked at my notes from my interview. And when I was asked questions by the council, when I asked questions of the commission, I want to just highlight some of those concise questions that I asked them. Tell me about the commission. Is change a word, or is it a commitment, and is it unanimous? The answer, it is unanimous and it is a commitment. Tell me all about the police service and the approach and the city's approach to data. The answer was the city actually committed to open data as a pillar, and as far as the police service, I think we could do more. How do you budget? It is based on a formula in 4-year cycles. What involvement do you have with the universities in the city, particularly the University of Alberta, in relation to data, AI, and research? Answer, very limited, some research. I asked many questions on the not-for-profits and looked at the end poverty strategy, which included the creation of Reach Edmonton, a first-of-its-kind organization focused in this space in Canada, with a CEO that I've known from my last job. Why was this important to me? I've been working in police reform for 10 years. My privilege has that I've been all over the world working on this. I have spoken in several countries and have had many successes with our vulnerable and our minority communities. Things such as hubs, recruiting to reflect marginalized communities. As a deputy minister, I chaired a working group just before I left to reduce the overrepresentation of marginalized peoples in the justice system, just to name a few. As a member of the Métis community, I've had my challenges growing up. But like everybody has challenges, this is not about me. I was told by an elder when taking a leadership role that I would be measured by the Creator on what I did with the time and talent He gave me. I don't know how much time He gave me, but I do know that since I've been in Edmonton, I've seen a ton of talent. Now more than ever, it's time to lead change. Let me start with what I believe the utopia or the end state. Let me bring some facts into the equation, talk about some things we have changed, things that we are working on, and what I agree and disagree with points being made by the Black Lives Matter movement. At a coffee with the chief in the media a short while after taking on my new role in Southeast Division, I was asked a peculiar question by the media. Chief, if you were king for a day, what would you do, or how would you change policing in the world? My response, and this is at least 12 months ago, I would change the model of policing and align it more closely with our public health services. We need to challenge the status quo. This answer comes after significant work in how you would change the outcomes, or how do you reduce the demand or need for the justice system. In my short time, I won't be able to get in full detail, but I will give you the pillars of why. Most of this data I've shared already. What drives calls for service of the Edmonton Police Service? 92.7% of our calls are priority 4s and 5s. Most serious starts with 1, least serious starts with 5. Police are responsible for 100% of intake in the justice system. Key risk factors from hubs and other jurisdictions I've mentioned, similar to the Edmonton experience, that overrepresentation of mental health and addictions, trauma, domestic violence, lack of employment, and housing are all indicators that need to be focused on. Public health has the ability to engineer, and police have the ability to re-engineer to get the folks connected to the right services pre-justice. This is a community safety and well-being which ultimately should be at the core of community policing, in my opinion. If you change the structure, you automatically change the approach, which includes the training. Think of that for a minute. Utopia, but does police actually need to be in the justice system? To do this, you need 4 things to be successful. You must have community partnerships. You and your community agencies must be data-driven and evidence-based to focus on things that work. You must have local solutions. A solution, after me going to many community meetings with many of our communities, they're not the same in downtown Edmonton as they are in Southwest. But neither of them are less important. It's because what people feel, perceive, and what they see is real. How do you measure collective outcomes across systems? Why have we never done this? But to do this work, you must be honest with yourself in what we know that doesn't work to address initiatives that lack impact. There are many examples of these types of things in the human services system. Some of these are, we just need to work faster. Or another one, just give us more resources and we will work harder. Or another one, let's have another inquiry again to tell some of the same stories with no actions that build hope. Missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls still lacks action today. Or perhaps my favorite is we have to stop working in silos that we have been in for the last 30 plus years, then never change the systemic structure that actually causes much of the problem. As a police leader, a former leader in government, and as a citizen, we must most often miss the point that making systemic change requires, in essence, of dropping the mick and changing the system. Although the Black Lives Matter movement is focused on the police, let's be open and honest and say in our whole human services approach on the front end of which we call upstream needs to be redesigned. Our back ends have pretty good examples, like our correctional centers when they are giving time and resources to focus on rehabilitation, or our hospitals doing acute care, and the list goes on. First, reducing intake with appropriate measures on the front end to get people in need of services out of the system before they get entrenched or caught up in one of our complex systems pays dividends. The second is to ensure everything we do on the back end is focusing on off-ramping people to independence. By doing things that work and measuring what we get out of the system versus what we put in. This means collecting good data, measuring the outcomes and not the outputs. Before I get into the crux of our information about the Edmonton Police Service, I think it's important to differentiate some of the things between policing in Canada and policing in the United States. As a precursor to this, I want to be clear to articulate, although we are different, Canada too has much work to do. Here are just a few examples of those differences. In Canada, we have a federal criminal code. In the US, there are federal and state laws that don't always match, of which some are asking for change. In Canada, we are called police services. In the US, it is usually a police force. Small difference, but words matter. In Canada, police leaders and police officers are public servants, and in the US, some chiefs are elected. In Canada, we have 235 different police agencies. In the US, there are over 18,000, yet their population is only 10 times more than us. In the US, the use of lethal force is approximately 6 times higher than that of Canada. To compare, the US had 987 police-involved shootings in 2015 alone. In Canada, from 1990 to 2014, there was 376. Some ask me, what is the proportion of a city's budget in US cities versus that of ourselves? Well, this varies in the US. I would focus on a couple cities recently in the news. Minneapolis policing costs are 35.8% of the gross budget. Chicago policing costs are 38.6% of the police budget. Edmonton police costs are 14.9% of the city budget, which, being open, I think is a good thing. Let's now jump into some of the questions or demands put to councillors for us to answer. This leads me to address some of the questions or proposals that Black Lives Movement has put forward to you in form letters, social media, etc. Defunding. What does that even mean? To me, having lived in this environment over 33 years in various positions, I would strenuously argue this actually starts with a question that all police leaders should be living by. Success is working your way out of a job because you are no longer needed, because your community is safe and everybody lives happily ever after. We all know that this isn't the case in Edmonton, or any other Canadian city for that matter. I want to address the defunding issue head on because it's the biggest potential impact on public safety. Some statistical information on EPS. We dispatch one call every 3 minutes, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We need our officers to go to these calls because they're 100% from our citizens. We responded to 1,049 sexual assault-related incidents in 2019. Of these, 468 become sexual assault section files. Over 8,000 domestic violence calls, which we work well with our partners. We're seeing a 7% increase already this year, potentially linked to COVID. This time last year versus the year before, we're still on average in both years to take 480 guns off the street already. As I said before, we've seen meth as a problem in our community. In 2019, we seized over 40,000 grams of methamphetamine off the street. Over double the amount as compared to cocaine. This drug makes people do unpredictable things and often violent things that they might not ever do otherwise. This year, we've already gone to 1,765 Mental Health Act calls. How much of this increase will go up because of COVID-19? It is almost ironic that on Monday of this week, it was the 5-year anniversary of the tragic death of Constable Dan Woodall, who was killed in the line of duty. Or that just a few months ago, Abdullah Hassan Sharif was sentenced to 27 years for what it was described as a terrorist attack on Constable Chernick and the citizens in the city of Edmonton at Commonwealth Stadium. And now to an event that happened and sparked in Minneapolis, thousands of miles away, we have members of the public screaming at us and telling us how much they hate us. As a constable told me yesterday when I was going into work, and I want to quote this because it's important. Chief, this has turned in from a movement for change to people just hating us. I wasn't here for either of those, but surely the city of which I grew up in and around, this is not the case. I'm getting these emails forwarded to me on a daily basis from our association presidents. Now I want to be clear. I don't want to give you these numbers to scare you, and I hate sharing these statistics because they are not good. And this is what I came here to work with you in changing them. This is the reality of why we have work to do and will need the right partners at the table. I'm not sure if anybody knows that the Edmonton Police Service has already 140 active community partnerships in the city of Edmonton. Many of these partnerships have us as one of the integral partners, if not in most the lead partner. I deliberately haven't mentioned suicides, overdoses, stolen vehicles, property thefts, damage and disruption to the fiber of our business community, etc. Since I have arrived, I have said we need to change the way we operate as a community. How we organize, how we approach problems with a continuum of services, accountability and outcomes be at the center of everything we do. Policing in Edmonton has an independent commission representing our community. As mentioned, many of them with different backgrounds from minority communities, different professions. In skill sets, they ensure that we have to report our results on an annual basis and that we're measured against them. This said, if we still agree with the premise of defunding the police and haven't realized yet that we are one of the few agencies that work 24/7, 365 days a year and take house calls when many of our other agencies have gone home, then let's talk logistically how we can make this happen. The social issues that we're talking about don't stop at 6 o'clock. If we start with cutting the $75 million, let's just use that number because that number was presented to us. That is again in the form letter. What would that look like? Is it doable? You bet it's doable. How do you do it? Well, we're 82% of our budget comes from our salary costs. So cuts like this would obviously include job loss. We were working on our budget way before this to figure out what the impact of COVID-19 are, and I'm going to council with a report. To our commission with a report in the very near future. But to get this number, we need to understand what this means, what we'd have to do. First, between 11 to 15 million of cuts that I can explain in more detail in camera after we present this to the police commission. In addition to that, we would have to cut 500 officers at a time when most of our communities have stated they would like more visibility. People in the business community continue to ask for increased presence. What does 500 people look like? Because it's important when you throw these statements out that you understand what it looks like. That means everybody hired in the last 5 years would be laid off to the rules of the collective agreement. What would we as EPS lose? This is the future of our police service and our community. Let me give you a rough overview of the last 140 officers hired. They are diverse in thought, diverse in experience, diverse in race, diverse in skin color, diverse in gender and sexual experience. Included are 46 women, 40 members of the minority communities. Many have doctorates, master's degrees, commercial pilots, professional athletes, and trades from all over Canada and the world. Many speak multiple languages. This would be gone if you asked me how that would play out. I would say it would take us back many years on and do much of we accomplished in the last few years, and in particular last year's. Now I want to move from the negative doom and gloom to the reason I mentioned the efficiency formula. I am not sure who designed this, but I assume it's somebody on this council that I am before here today. This is one of the brightest and most effective strategies that I've seen that is perfectly designed to restrain spending within policing. While allowing policing to make internal decisions with the oversight of a commission, this already forces us to make hard choices, to look at things differently, without, like many, coming with numbers that you can't predict or forecast. When the economy was in the downturn of 2019, we were able to return and grow our efficiency factor with an $11 million reduction. We did this while focusing at the same time on the path forward, Vision 2020, designed to restructure our police service to focus on demand reduction and off-ramps that work, while ensuring we are on point in putting the people in jail that we are afraid of versus the ones we are frustrated with or mad at. This was accomplished without an additional ask due to the funding formula. We have been rolling out Vision 2020 since November 2019. It has slowed down due to COVID, but let me highlight some of the changes. We started recruiting talent. Unfortunately, this meant moving some people out of the organization within leadership roles, and we replaced them. What did we replace them with? Well, let me give you some of the backgrounds. A doctor in psychology, a PhD in mathematics, a master's degree in computer science focused on simulation and modeling, a doctor and master's in epidemiology, a PhD in systems planning, an expert in social design, education, sustainability, and performance management. We hired an MBA from Oxford that served in the Indian Army, an IT system expert, an expert in data analytics and business solutions. These moves have all been made within the last year to ensure that we have the knowledge and talent to drive the right change and to ensure that we are the partner that can add voice and measurement to ensure that we work towards outcomes with our partners. This was the first change in moving forward with 75 recommendations which are available to council if they shall wish, that have been approved by Chiefs Committee and the Commission. We stood up a new bureau, the first of its kind in Canada, Canadian policing, called the Community Safety and Wellbeing Bureau. The status was elevated to the bureau level to ensure it remains a priority with the responsibility resting with the Deputy Chief. This is no longer a side-of-the-desk activity. It is built to work with all of our community partners to reduce the demand within the justice system and to ensure the things that we are involved in deliver impact for the resources, including both human and the financial that we expend. Vision 2020 has allowed us to reprioritize our resources to address areas where we can have the most impact. Some of these are Diversion First, refers at-risk teens to support agencies. Help programs divert at-risk individuals away from court to support. Offender management prevents known criminals from reoffending. Clients of these programs usually generate multiple calls for service by helping them turn their lives around and to help reduce our call volumes. More details are available, and there's much more in these areas. But we've reviewed our entire structure internally to change our focus towards balancing the reducing demand with enforcement. Although COVID-19 has slowed us down, as I've mentioned, we have reinvested $5.5 million and 29 FTEs of existing budget into this area. We took much of this out of our specialized sections that were mostly focused on the back-end services. We listened to our community leagues and our business districts through face-to-face meetings, and we have reinvested 20 additional FTEs to the front line to increase our presence at a cost of $3 million, and plan to put another 30 more officers to the front line visibility at a cost of another $4.5 million in the next 6 to 8 months. The sole purpose, as I've mentioned, is to increase visibility, improve community service delivery, and to use data to better deploy in reducing crime and enhancing community safety and well-being. In addition, we created a fourth division called Crime Suppression and Investigation, which is returning to using our beat officers to focus on communities' needs and build the relationships citywide, prioritizing areas of need and building relationships through a consistent deployment of the same personnel on citywide problems that is borderless and intelligence-led. To support this, we completed our strategic plan, created a value and impact division out of the Chief's office that ensures we measure and evaluate what I discussed, and included a new strategic plan with a new vision and mission in combination with our commission and association that was completed in March this year and is the first time done since 2013. To ensure we made diversity a priority as one of the Commission's outcomes, we created an equity inclusion branch to come back with an equity and diversity policy, which Edie O'Care, who's with me here today, and Inya can speak to in Q&A. We then put our community relations office into the office of the chief to ensure these priorities remain a priority and that diversity is our single biggest asset. To accomplish this, it is fully recognized that is to be done with our community partners. We reinvested $1.7 million and 11 FTEs into our value impact division to up our game in measurement and other priorities as mentioned. We believe to accomplish our mission and goals, we will have to lead change and stop owning change. A new structure with a new focus will allow us to move faster. It will allow us to move from a hard-on-crime approach, which I call arrest and incarcerate, or a soft-on-crime approach, which some call hugs and second chances, to a smart-on-community safety and well-being approach means you do both at the same time. It's ambitious, it's well-studied, and its demand reduction is about getting under communities versus on top of them to drive change. We are ambitious. We want to be the first in the country and perhaps the world to do it. I believe we have the ability to do it, and we are betting on our community to do it with us. Of interest, during COVID-19, we've actually proven some of our plan works. An example of by focusing on demand reduction and taking priority 5s and 7 calls off the board, our proactive work has reduced the numbers, caught criminals involved in considerable property crime through proactive measures. There is no question to do this, though, it is going to take community. It can't be done without them. It needs courageous leadership that is willing to take some risks, knowing full well that failure is what we presently have, and we will make mistakes. What we won't be is another study or group as an entity that sits around waiting for more deaths, inquests, compounding into the thousands we have in this country that tell us that we need to share information better with each of our partners to avoid tragic results. Similar to what the Black Lives Matter movement is saying, demanding, we believe and are willing to defend our beliefs. This is not about one or the other. It's about working together collectively in partnership to achieve our shared outcomes. We can't do it alone. We need our partners in mental health and addictions, social services, and housing to be at the table with us. The decision made by council, and I want to highlight this because I'm not sure people understand this, but certainly we do, to control our own destiny with permanent supportive housing rather than waiting for others to move forward is a great example of the kinds of courage we will need in many other areas. The mental health and addictions approach being worked at with the province, focusing on a recovery approach with pillars of treatment, intervention, and prevention, is another example of trying to put balance into a system that doesn't only focus on one pillar and limits the chance for success within the population needing the services. We already have many great partners, like REACH and others, working with us to get the work underway. We are working with partners in our business community where we can find space to put services under one roof so we can start getting the right people to help with people in need as quickly as possible under the same roof. Let me now address some of the other concerns that were expressed in the form letter, and these are in no particular order. Body cameras. I do not think this is a good investment to create value and impact, but let me tell you why. There have been 70 studies and evaluations completed on the impacts of body-worn cameras on the police and the public. These have recently been combined into a meta-analysis performed by Lumstoltz, Culper, and Scher, which states the following in their summary. Although officers and citizens are generally supportive of body-worn cameras use, body-worn cameras have not statistically significant or consistent effects on most measures of officer and citizen behavior or citizens' views of police. Expectations and concerns surrounding body-worn cameras among police leaders and citizens have not yet been realized by a large in large by the ways it was anticipated by each. Policy implications from available evidence are not clear-cut, but most likely body-worn cameras will not be an easy panacea in improving police performance, accountability, and relationships with citizens. The simple fact is, body-worn cameras used in the world, where are the most body-worn cameras used in the world right now? The United States. One might make some assumptions, maybe the study has got some merit. Body-worn video is narrow. It focused outward on the person they are dealing with versus the officer's actions. Body-worn cameras for EPS are estimated at a capital cost of $4 to $6 million with an annual operating cost of approximately $2 million. I would much rather focus the training on the officer wearing the camera and invest in the communities through our community safe well-being program that we are building. This said, I agree, and I think Tom Engel of the criminal trial lawyer said it yesterday when he sent it out. We need dash cams in cars. These cameras give a panoramic view, capturing both the officers and the citizens, and have up to 300 foot of audio range and accompany the video. We've already started this work. This has been action. We're hoping to have this done in the next 18 months. In addition, the EPS has been working to strengthen its ability to securely accept video from the public for investigations and remote interviewing during the present COVID pandemic. These same tools could be incorporated into an independent body for review of both positive and negative videos of officers and citizens' interactions. Lastly, to be clear, I believe the body cameras have low value, but as stated by the Prime Minister, as he is recommending them to somebody, and I would say this, if somebody pays for them from outside of the city and funds the operating costs, we will wear them. School resource officers. We have lots of details and some testimonies from our principals and students on this as well. Let's start by why we are in schools. Because it costs a lot more not to be. Let me explain why. But before I say that, we're there because we've been invited by our partners in a partnership. Dr. Linda Duxbury of Carleton University, who I know pretty well, did an in-depth study of this program in Peel Regional Police with the Peel Regional School Board. There is significant value to be in the schools in partnership for both the schools and the police, is one of the findings. A study, and I think it's 9-to-1 payback. A study at the University of Alberta with a lady working on her master's degree and almost complete with 2 high schools here in Edmonton. Some of the preliminary findings are the research studied the interaction relationships between the SROs and Indigenous LGBTQ2+ and youth. It was conducted through case studies. Preliminary findings show positive interactions and support between youth and SROs. The SRO is a positive program that engages diverse youth in a myriad of ways. Then there is a study we did in Saskatchewan when I was the deputy minister. That was the first ever of its kind using microsimulation of justice data cross-referenced with data from an inner-city socially outcome finance school. The data shows if we have marginalized youth graduation rates attain the same rate of graduation rates of non-marginalized youth and get them into post-secondary, the risk factor of justice involvement goes to 0. I think we need to double down. Then there's the old myth of certain states in the U.S. building jails based on grade 3 literacy levels. Not sure if this is a myth or not, but the literacy rates in the correctional facilities that I had under me were on average between grades 3 and grade 5. Oh, and if this is not enough, a little anecdote. My wife is a retired teacher and my daughter is a teacher, and they could protect future justice involvement better than any police officer that ever worked for me or with me. So if it's predictable, why isn't it preventable? Why do we wait for kids that are struggling to get into the justice system? And this is what this program is designed to do. The shows up in our SRO stats that approximately 2% of interactions involve charges of some kind, criminal code or education act. 2%. As a police chief, that makes this decision that we're in this to our partners don't want us there. I've been asked many times, I've addressed this a few times, and I want to speak very clearly on it and make it on record so everybody can decipher the words and what is written down. Street checks and carding. They're strong suggestions by the movement that I, as the chief of police, are one of the biggest supporter of carding. Let's be clear on this. The Honorable Michael Tulloch, an Afro-Canadian Jamaican judge, completed a review for the province of Ontario in 2018. I had a chance to speak with Justice Tulloch, including an interview as his study. The first thing we must look at when talking about this is understand what people are talking about. To get this understanding, let's look at differences in this definition when comparing street checks with carding, as described by many uninformed people commenting in this space. Definitions. Street check is where information is obtained by a police officer concerning an individual outside of a police station. That is not part of the investigation. This is a broad category of police information gathering and much of its legitimate gathering of potentially useful information. Carding is a small subset of street checks in which a police officer randomly asks an individual to provide identifying information when an individual is not suspected of any crime, nor is there any reason that that individual has information about any crime. This information is then entered into a police database. I would firmly state in response to this, you can't have community policing without talking to the community. Street checks. I would also firmly state you cannot have the respect of the community if you do random checks that are not ethical. Carding. The Edmonton Police Commission did their own independent review in 2016, followed by an audit of our system in 2018. There are some important findings generalized how you talk to people made a difference. The people with the most training in talking to people are beat officers who completed most street checks with 0 complaints. How do you record the process for transparency purposes was essential, and that you auditing to make sure your practices are sound and they don't wander. EPS has made several changes in this area, some of which are extensive training delivered to recruits, frontline patrol members, patrol supervisors, beat and foot patrol members, centralized oversight of data for audit and transparency, random auditing of 190 files twice a year. 6 audits have been done to date with a compliance rate of 95%. Recruiting focused on increased diversity over the past few years as a recommendation of the report. And I spoke to the diversity earlier in the recruiting. So again, the question, does the Edmonton Police Service practice random carding as defined for no apparent reason? No. And we have processes in place to audit against it. Does the Edmonton Police Service do street checks, and will we continue to do them as part of police work? Yes. How many have we done? 2017, 15,911. 2018, 11,063. 2019, 8,073. Year-to-date, 3,029. Now, I want to end on addressing police discipline and police misconduct, as this is at the heart of this matter. I have met with Justin Crickler. I have with me today, Justin Crickler, the head of my legal department. Justin was one of the first changes I made in my leadership team shortly after I took the job. Justin is the first civilian lawyer that has led our police complaints branch. He is an active community member and is somebody who asked to come in and redesign much of our discipline process, of which he has been doing since he arrived and could speak to you in great detail. I want to acknowledge publicly that the Edmonton Police Service is on record for asking the province to reopen the Police Act long before the horrific events in Minneapolis. There are many changes that need to be made. I will also commit to have my team consult with our communities for input on how we can increase public confidence, accountability, and police legitimacy during this review that is now open. I want to further state that I agree with Black Lives Matter and other minority communities that EPS welcomes independent oversight in investigation of all public police complaints. I would further state, as president of the AACP, the Alberta Association of Chiefs of Police, that there is also further support for an independent body, possibly an expansion of ACERT model, which is chaired by a prosecutor or some other equivalent independent body, with the stipulation that it needs to be fair to all parties, funded properly, and have the ability to function in a timely manner for both the complainant and the police parties involved. I have made comments on most of the individual complaints in social media realm at present, and either Justin and I will go into further details on any of the files or videos that have been put onto social media in further detail if asked. Let me conclude with the message. The Edmonton Police Service has heard the message and has been and will continue to drive change to better support our vulnerable communities, including with the starting commitments that I have made on record today and will continue to make. The Edmonton Police Service will continue to put high value on diversity and how we interact with the diverse communities, and constantly evaluating and training to improve within this area and report out on it. Our 2020 strategic plan that came into effect of March 2020 has put community at the center with measurable actions to balance support with enforcement, partner and advocate, innovate and advance, and grow diverse talents. Lastly, Edmonton is not the U.S., and EPS is not an American police service. EPS needs work like every police service does. Let's be open and honest. And to be clear, we will own our mistakes, but the majority of our police are caring professionals who generally want to serve their community and make positive changes each day they put on a uniform. That said, there is a minority of our officers who put us in a bad light, and we need to deal with those people. On that, I'm sure we all can agree. As your chief, I do not take these things lightly and never will. Thank you for your time. We will answer any questions you have. Also, as chief, I can make this commitment. The Edmonton Police Service is committed to change, continue to work with our marginalized communities, and our door is always open for leaders who are willing to work with us to get this right. I also want to state very clearly, why I was hired. EPS needs to be held accountable. In partnership with the Commission and with Council, we all need to get this done. I would thank you for giving me the time. As you can see, passionate about this. As I can see, I think there's a lot of good things that a movement can actually drive change, and I'm respectful of that. I just want to really urge calm, and I really want to urge that this is beyond police, but this is about the city of Edmonton, the citizens of Edmonton, of all communities, all diversities, and an equal voice to our marginalized population, that we make the right decisions. And lastly, as much as this is about heartstrings, and as much as this is about we have to be better because that's what we do, there's a huge economic price tag here that we can utilize to make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Chair Ruth. Councillor Walters had selected this item, so I'll go there first and note that the order after that is Councillor Essinger, Councillor Paquette, Councillor Henderson, Councillor Knack, yes, Councillor Essinger, Councillor Paquette, Councillor Henderson, Councillor Knack, and Councillor Banga so far. Councillor Walters, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And firstly, I just wanted to say thank you to all the people who are listening in, who have expressed their feelings and perspectives to us in the past few days. And thank you to Chair Ruth and to Chief McPhee, who are today, all of you expressing tremendous passion about this topic and the challenge that we face. And I also feel like I need to say that no matter what council says or asks, it will be perceived as too sympathetic of the police or not sympathetic enough of the police, and there's tremendous scorekeeping taking place. But we shouldn't care about that. What we need to care about is the process towards transformation, and to be honest about that process. But to start with, Chief McPhee, racism is a terrible reality in our society to this very minute, and particularly in a police service which is designed inherently to protect people. It is a service in Canada, as you say. And you've said this in many ways, but I want to give you a chance to try and articulate it as clearly and concisely as you can. Why in a service that's designed to protect people and has so much interaction with people, and particularly with vulnerable people, why is racism still a problem in a police service, in any police service, where, like it or not, there's a higher standard?
Yeah, and I agree with the higher standard, and I think that's exactly part of the reason why I think the structure change is needed. If you think of it, police have one authority really when it's dealing with people. It's put them in the justice system. There's no authority to push them anywhere else. It's a collaboration thing. Collaboration, as you know, probably better than anybody as a counselor. It's been a long time in the job. Doesn't work. And we're designed in a system by our authorities, and we're not designed of what the service people need and the calls for service that we are responding to. So
to just interrupt, is the opportunity in the changes coming to the Police Act to design racism out of the policing profession?
I think there's sorry, finish?
No, that's
No,
okay.
I think there's big opportunities in the Police Act. There's lots of changes. I mean, it hasn't been dealt with for many, many years. There's a lot of communities that need to be involved. I think what we need to make sure, and that's what I committed to, is getting the input from all of our community stakeholders to make sure that the Police Act reflects what we need to exactly that, install public confidence, restore or build police legitimacy, but most importantly, that everybody has a voice in the changes. So I think it's an opportunity. Is it panacea? No. I think it's training. I can go on to a myriad of different things, and I'm going to turn that over to Anino Care to say some things we're doing.
Right.
And thank you for the question, sir. So I think it's important that we also speak about the training that does take place at the Edmonton Police Service. So you speak about a higher standard and we should be more accountable. And that is why that our organization focuses on bias awareness and cultural safety, Indigenous historical trauma, trauma-informed policing, the victim-offender overlap, procedural justice and police legitimacy, LGBTQS+ awareness, adverse childhood experiences, community conversations, which is an opportunity to meet and learn from members of Edmonton's diverse, Indigenous, and underserved communities and youth. We have a harassment in the workplace policy, and we also have now a new equitable inclusion and diversity policy within the EPS.
Forgive me, I'm going to run out of time, and I think we're all probably only get one round each today. But so if there is an opportunity to legitimately design racism out of policing through the Police Act, that's what I'm interested in talking about. But I want to, in my last bit of time here, talk about this idea, what I described as a valid conversation about reallocation of funding. 30% of our work, of your work as a service, is social work, is what you've said in the past, what the previous chief has said. HR ramifications are uncomfortable, but we all need to agree that we all agree this is a time to be uncomfortable. So what if there's some of that, if some of that money needs to be shifted to other supports in the community?
Well, I mean, I think first and foremost, we're already doing that. And I think I'd probably, if you asked our community partners, I think we're the integral partner. Think of it, the city of Edmonton. I want to comment on this because this is important. We built a perfect house, but nobody's wired it together. There's nothing connected. And we as the police need to be the electrician to start wiring the house. We need to lead that change because we have an autonomy, a voice of autonomy, and we need to do it with our community partners to do it. You've stood up something called REACH, which we're all aware of, that I spoke of earlier. That is a perfect catalyst and vehicle, but it also makes sure that budget flows in and that budget's on a continuous services. You can't, the problem we always make, we throw from one to the other and we don't address what we're trying to solve. We got to get the questions right first. That's what we're focused on. I give you a list of all the people we've hired. We have to change this. And if we do this right, in time, we will need less police.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Walters. Councillor Esslinger, go ahead.
First of all, I want to say thank you for your presentation today and for all the work that your members do each and every day. And as much as we received many emails looking at changes, we've also received emails, or at least I have many, talking about the valuable service that you provide to citizens. So thank you. And I want to talk about the community commitment, because I know that you, Chief, have been out to some of the communities that I served and some of the businesses, and you really talk about not doing this work alone and how that we're all in this together. One of the things that keeps coming up when we talk in the broader community sense is people have lived experiences that are not positive with the police. So how do you plan to improve those relationships that people have had that have created the negative outlook towards police?
That's, first of all, Councillor Eisler, thank you for your kind words. I think my service probably could use some of that right now. Second of all, I think you've touched on something very, very, another point of change that we're going to continue to focus on. And so the one video with the knee of the individual on the individual's neck, I sent Anini out to speak with them, and we set up a meeting, and I was there speaking with them last night. I'm not going to get into details because that's a private conversation. But it really opened my eyes to the fact that when we do a PSB investigation, which is a public complaints investigation, we don't take the time to separate that and go back in the visit to actually remend and deal with the impact that that potentially situation had, especially in some of our refugee and minority communities. So that is a process that we're going to build into our police service, that we actually can start to repair some of those relationships beyond a public's complaint to actually looking at the impact that we've had on those individuals and how we, for whatever reasons and, you know, whatever things that they've been dealing with, we repair that. But I wanted Nina just to talk real quickly, as I know you probably have more questions on the Compassion series.
So I'll try to be concise. As the chief had mentioned, we've had individuals who may have not felt reconciled through going through the PSB process or the complaint process. So what we're trying to do is create a way that we can, through video, question and answer, have folks actually speak about their lives, try to humanize them, and as well as humanize them to the service and vice versa. So through conversation, through actual discussions, we start to see the humanity in one another and understand each other's lived experience. And we find that that has been a powerful way to actually create a message that we are in this together.
Thank you. I think one of the challenges is when you have a bad experience, you don't keep it to yourself. You share it with others. So we have to be able to get the message out to the broader community as a result of those as well. I want to talk a moment about the school resource officers. I know as a former school trustee some of the great work that's happened, but you only can go into the schools at the request of a school board, and in partnership they share the cost. Is that not correct?
In the partnership, the SRO, yes, correct. And we have 3 new schools wanting school resource officers, but as mentioned, we have to balance those decisions, but you're correct. And that's what I was getting at. We're there till our partners don't want us.
Yes, and it is often a financial consideration for them as well. But some of the work that I've seen is, as you shared, was amazing. So I just wanted to speak about that for a moment. And I know I'm almost out of time, I'm guessing.
40 seconds,
But
Council.
I guess the last thing is, I'd love to see us flatten the curve on gender-based violence. It's a scourge to our community, and could you just speak to that for a moment?
Yeah, absolutely. And Livanina, a couple words you probably want to say, but that's our focus. I mean, our marginalized communities and some of our minority communities are not only overrepresented in the justice system, but they're coming with things and it's not always equitable. And we need to figure out how we can track that in relation from an ethical perspective. And we need to make sure we're following up. And one of the suggestions that came to me, and I won't say from which community, and hopefully we can do it, but there's no work when some of our immigrant families come over here, and some come from some significant areas. Police weren't good. Not saying we're good. I think we're pretty good, but we have work to do. They come from where police just take kids away and they beat them. And if that's their perception, nobody's actually sat down to talk to them in a proactive manner and educate them. We got to get ahead of this. We got to do this on the front end, and we're committed to doing. And that's, I think, where our communities can actually bring some value to us. For instance, our Indigenous community and Cheryl Whiskey Jack and healing circles and stuff, those have paid great dividends for us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Essinger. Councillor Paquette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Chief McPhee, for being here. An interesting word came up, humanizing, and that should set alarm bells ringing, I think, when we have to do work to see other people as human. So one of the things that, I'm going to try to be brief, and if we could engage in brevity, that would be great. Canada itself, would it be fair to say, was founded on maybe an unconscious bias towards systemic racism, especially as we see in treatment of Indigenous people, the Indian Act, and the fact that we don't speak any of the Indigenous languages here in Canada. And also our history with Black people, slavery, immigration at the outset of the formation of Canada. Would it be fair to say that systemic racism is baked into, in some way or another, all of our systems?
I when you talk about racism and bias, as you know, Councillor Paquette, as do I, having spent some time in this space, absolutely it is. I think it's better. Do we have a lot of work to do? Yeah, absolutely we do. But I think you nailed a very important point. You can't deal with this in one sector, and just because one sector, in this case policing, is under the microscope, which it should be based on what happened in Minneapolis, but this requires a continuum of services, as you know, and without that, we're just putting a Band-Aid on it, and we're not going to actually get to the root of it. And that's what I meant, that I think we need to change the system as in the key word in systemic.
Right, and that's because, as you alluded to, the authorities determine the legal parameters and the requirements for police action. And so when we're talking about police, is it important to remember that officers are citizens who have been entrusted with these enforcement powers? And yet we often, when we're talking about officers and citizens, there's a separation, even though we're one community. So should we be thinking about some of the language we use when we're describing these relationships? Because obviously language impacts our thoughts.
No, I agree with you, and as I said, even the difference between U.S. police service, police force, that makes a difference, right? And there's lots of examples in relation to this, and we've actually, and we can provide some detail on this because I don't want to waste your time, but we have a whole pile of different things that we've incorporated into training out of the recommendations of the Street Checks review in how we get more minority hiring into our police service, because with hiring diversity, you change the thought process. But you got to remember, EPS, even though we're under the microscope now, has taken a lot of the right positive steps, but we got to keep expediting that. We got to keep focus.
Right. Because, sorry to interrupt, but you are the enforcement arm of an entire system that has inherent in it a systemic bias. So this is the root of the problem. And as you say, this is all encompassing. But the focus, I think, on police is because that is the enforcement of these systems. So I guess my next question would be, if this is the case, is transformation possible within the system, or should we be centering the voices of the people who are normally not heard? Or should we be centering Black, Indigenous, LGBTQS plus, immigrants, women? Should we be centering those voices if we actually want to affect systemic change? And should the solutions be coming from those communities?
Yes, and we are, and we need to do more, and we've restructured. I can't speak for the system across, well, I could actually, but I'll focus on EPS with the time. We've incorporated all that, but it's all new, and it's going to take some time to work with that, and certainly even folks like yourself with vast experience, we're certainly open to some ideas and suggestions. And again, back to Councillor Walter's point, this is a point where we can actually reflect this in some Police Act changes as well.
Yeah. My time, Mr. Mayor?
Is up, I'm afraid.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson.
Yeah, maybe I'll start just with a story from my own experience as a preface to the question I want to ask. And it really, Chief, relates, I think, to the latter part of what you were saying towards the end. You know, when I was growing up, you know, albeit in a city that still had a beat cop on the corner, you know, I was told that the beat cop was my friend and that's who I should go to if I got into trouble. And what's really struck me in the last little while, and what I've heard in thinking about this, is there are far too many of our citizens who are completely innocent of any crimes or any ill doing, who do not feel that the police officer is a safe person to go talk to on the corner. And it seems to me that that's the essence here of, I think, and we've talked about this a lot. This is not a new thing. We've been talking about this for quite some time, which is, you know, I should say I'm completely supportive of everything you're talking about upstream. That all makes perfect sense to me. And I think that's about trying to be preventative in terms of crime. But I think the real problem we're dealing with here is that too many of our citizens do not see the police as their friends. They see them as something to be wary of. And just to finish, and then before I ask you for your thoughts on this, I know some of this is it comes from a culture that is vestigial, that was put in place by chiefs well before your time. You know, and I just anecdotally think of when we went from light blue uniforms to dark blue uniforms, which I think was probably designed to create a culture of intimidation and fear. Maybe that's too strong a language, but you know, the choice more recently to go from the more colored police cars to the black and white police cars. I mean, these are emblematic. I'm not suggesting that these are huge issues, but it does strike me that there's something there around the cultural relationship we have with our citizens that is clearly leaving a whole bunch of people feeling like the police are someone to be wary of, not to be their friends. And I think somewhere or other, trust is of the essence of everything that makes this work and will make this work. And I say this saying that, having worked with a lot of police, there's a lot of really good people working out there who totally get that this is where we need to be going. But somehow or other, we're still not achieving, I think, what we've been trying to achieve for way too long in terms of recreating that feeling that I had as a kid, and for everybody in our city. And I guess that's the challenge I want to throw out. I know we've been trying. It's not for lack of trying, but we don't seem to be getting there. So if I was pushing for something, I'd be pushing for something we can do radically to rearrange that cultural relationship between us and all of our citizens. So thoughts?
Constable Henderson, insightful, couldn't agree with you more. Trust and legitimacy needs to be at the center. You're correct in police moving to more of a tactical response, yet saying that we're doing community policing. It's kind of like what is old is new again, and you're right. We actually, part of the things that I talked about, the changes, we are going back to that old beat model because it's the relationships with those communities, especially communities, like you say, that are new, that potentially are exposed to risk factors. We need to be in there, but not in there always because we're going to a call to take somebody out of there. We need to be in there on the front end. And then I think just the other comment that I think fuels this, and some good and some negative, is the new social media of today creates fear a lot quicker. It also gets exposure to things that need to be done, which is a good thing. But if we're not careful and we just throw things out and can't substantiate and throw opinions, that can lead to a snowball in a hurry. So I think all those things, to your point, are things we're working on, and I couldn't agree with you more.
And I guess I'd be interested. I don't have the answers of how to achieve that, but I think, in looking, we need some radical moves that actually get us there, because it just feels like we've been talking about it for a long time. In my dying seconds, I'm interested in the question of the REACH funding, because REACH has had a whole bunch of really great programs, most of which have been funded by one-time pilot projects that are wonderfully successful. And then the funding, because it's a pilot project, is not continued. A lot of that's with the provincial government, but if we're really going to allow REACH to do what it does, just your thoughts on that, because getting them longer term funding, I think, has got to be the important part of that. And we haven't really achieved that on a whole bunch of their most successful programs.
Yeah, and you know what I couldn't agree more on that. And, I'm going to put that out there right now that I sit on the REACH board. So I want to make sure I declare that for folks that don't know that. But if this entity was created, but in relation to your point, is we fund a whole bunch of things, in not just us, but, we're involved in partnerships, but more so the city, the provincial government, the federal government. And I was talking to one of our business communities, they won't identify, in one of or two of our local communities. They said there's 60 social agencies within several blocks in our neighborhood, and yet we're still seeing the same thing. So to your point, I think at some point another step forward, a potential thing, and this involves us too, is funding is one thing, but how are we centralizing funding, whether it's coming from the federal government, the provincial government, municipal government, First Nations government, wherever it's coming from, how are we centralizing that to ensure that we're working on the priorities of the city and the community versus things that somebody else might think are important, if that makes sense. I think REACH could be one of those arms to do that.
Great, thanks. I'm out of time.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. We've had a few more folks click on, so just so you can follow along, I have Councillor Knack next, then Councillor Banga, then Councillor McKean, then Councillor Katarina, then Councillor Carmel, then Councillor Hamilton on the first round still. So Councillor Knack, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for being here today. So I want to ask, focus on funding, because I don't know if we're going to get more than one round. And just to preface this again, I think the challenge is that right now we're sort of looking at this as an either or. There's a, even in the comments today, we talked about, well, should we, do what's being asked and defund and actually pull back the money or not? And I don't know if it needs to be viewed like that. I think that's obviously the goal of people, but even as simple as a question about what do we do with future years of funding? So before I go into a question, I do just want to ask, you mentioned 92.7% of the calls are priority 4 and 5. Do you have a breakdown of what percent is priority 4 and what percent is priority 5, out of curiosity?
I don't have it with me, but in relation to your point, I think you're bang on, and I want to echo something that you said in relation to either or. We are already, as I mentioned, taking a bunch of our internal money to be the leader to bring our agencies together. That was done way before this. And we see that as most of our external armies that are fighting the fight with us are our not-for-profits. And we need to help them data systems. We're working on a challenge for the Community Solutions Accelerator, et cetera, on how we understand what things are going to make the biggest impact of getting our vulnerable communities and minority communities in better equitable environments.
So with that in mind, that's why I do want to talk about this, because I actually do really agree with Councillor Walter's point around, if 30% of the calls are social work calls, we do need to have a conversation about that. That's probably not right now, right at this very moment. But I want to ask more generally, which is that, and I know what you said about the police funding formula, and I supported it, and I think problem that I think I'm now seeing is that we've got, so perfect example, right now we're dealing with hundreds of millions of dollars in a budget shortfall. We're going to go into a new budget for 2021, and we're likely going to have to make substantial cuts. But if we operate purely under the formula, then we're going to have to cut virtually every other area within the city, community supports, different programs, different services, just to make sure we're keeping up with the pace of the formula, which in turn subsequently starts to increase that percentage of funding that's going to policing. So I do want to ask the question here, I think, and you started touching on it, but I also maybe want to ask this from the commission perspective. Do we have we done the research, done some digging into saying, if we didn't have the next 2 years of funding, if that funding beyond cost of living increases, beyond what's in a collective bargaining agreement, was instead going to go to fund community supports, community services, community programs, what would they be? What would we want to be investing in? And how would that help allow police officers to focus their time and attention on those priority 1 through 3 calls? Has that work been done?
Yeah, we have doing the math on that, and what we're focused on is accountability and outcomes for sure. I think there's a couple things to consideration is your police calls for service in times when the economy downturns and everything else actually go up. So we're hiring social workers. We have mental health workers in our police cars right now doing PACT. We've got CART, child apprehension and teams. We're doing a lot of these things now. We need more of them. We need some of these things. We need to get in the same building and share information. And we need, again, back to the funding is, whether it's us or anybody else, the sum of the parts has to be greater than the individual parts. But we also got to remember that all of the calls for service to the police come from our public. So I think we got to find the right response. Give you an example of one you talked about. Dispatch. It all starts with a call for service. We have 5 or 6 dispatch centers in this city. You can't get the right service there unless you have the right structure to channel it in from intake, and the list goes on. But I think there's some synergies and efficiencies to your point of reducing redundancies and some focused on a continuum. And I also think, back to Constable Walter's point, there's ability to maybe find some lesser cost items if we can get some change in the Police Act.
And unfortunately, I think I'm already out of time and probably have another 99 questions. So
Afraid so.
I'll need to do more.
Well, this is the start of a conversation, not the end of it. And we'll discuss shortly when this will continue. I don't know if that's a promotion or a demotion, Constable Walters. That's okay. Councillor Banga, go ahead.
Thank
Sergeant,
you very much.
Once upon a time.
Thanks to everyone who's here and also tuned into this discussion remotely. Chief, rather than going into any details or history, we all admit that there is racism and biases that do exist in a society and even in the police service.
Yes.
And you are in this role for about 1 year approximately.
15
Would
months, yeah.
would you be able to tell us what are the new implementations since you took over the role of leadership?
Well, there's 75 recommendations in Vision 2020, some of which I've mentioned. We've totally restructured for this purpose. We've added training. We've built out a whole fulsome community strategy, community engagement. You know, we're dealing with some of our minority problems head on. You know, LGBTQ is just one of them. I could sit here and I could send you a list, but it's pretty extensive and not going to get through. But I guess easier to said, this is what the commission hired me to do. So that's what I'm here to do. And my commitment to you is I'll get it done. But you know, to your point, I realize that the economy is not good. I realize that we have a lot of work. I realize that we have some communities that aren't happy with some of our actions, and rightfully so. But we can't change the past. Like somebody was asking me about, what are you going to do about the Ku Klux Klan in the 1900s? I'm not sure I can fix that. But I sure in the heck can look through their front windshield and fix the path for the kids.
Thank you. And my next question is, we, as police service, we always work with the partner agencies. What are some of those difficulties that the partner agencies face that they need a police officer with them?
Starts with information sharing. You've probably heard this many, many times over. You can't solve a problem in isolation or with a snippet of the information. It starts with collective outcomes. Nobody's measured across systems. They're all measured in a siloed environment, thus the system. You need to focus on what is driving your work and who the people are that are driving your work and how can you most effectively reduce that. And for us, quite frankly, most of it is stuff that shouldn't be in the justice system, but we have no authority to push that first call for service, which we are the first call for service all the time, most of the time anyway, to the right service. And there's no authority to do that. So the challenges are, I don't think it's about money. I honestly don't. I think there's a ton of money in the system. I think it's how money is used.
Okay. And does police service do any community consultations or find out the satisfaction of the citizens? Or is it done by the city?
Well, we do have a citizen satisfaction survey that we put out, but we've also been over the last year revamping the Chiefs Advisory Council to be focused now. The new name will be the Chiefs Community Council, and the idea is to be working with all members of the communities that isn't stratified by or siloed by ethnocultural markers, to be focusing on what we've termed the social determinants of justice, which are similar to the social determinants of health. So the idea is we can focus on issues and where the police can be a leader and work with the community in order to actually drive to real solutions. So we're doing that, but we're also doing that with our new strategic plan. We've sent out our strategic plan to 200 community partners, and when COVID permits, we'll be out there doing some actual community engagement that is also going to be focused on reconciliation, but understanding the direction of the Edmonton Police Service.
Okay. As it currently exists, could somebody explain to me and everybody that's listening on remotely the complaint process against a police officer?
I'll turn that over to Justin Crickler.
Absolutely, Councillor Banga. I'd also like to say that Johnny Wakefield of the Edmonton Journal did a very fair job of covering this in an article he wrote recently, but essentially when a complainant feels aggrieved, they can contact either the police service through our professional standards branch or the police commission to hand in a complaint. When it comes in, we have an intake team at the professional standards branch who will assess the complaint, speak to the person, and work with them to try and tailor the right response. There are times when we can engage in an alternative dispute resolution process, which is called for under the Police Act. Alternatively, we can engage in a full investigation. When that's complete, we'll advise, the chief performs a screening function in those investigations and can make a certain number of determinations at the end, one of which is to send it to hearing. One is to sort of conduct a limited assessment of the evidence and determine whether or not there's a reasonable prospect of discipline at a hearing. And the other is to send a matter to, the other is the chief can discipline the member or hold the member accountable through a series of tools under the minor contraventions provision of the Police Act. I think it's also worth mentioning that when we are notified of a complaint, we will also assess the gravity of it to determine whether it ought to be referred to the Director of Law Enforcement, who oversees the Alberta Serious Incident Response Team, or ASIRT, to make sure that they are attached to it if necessary.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McKean.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to start by acknowledging all the people who have emailed into our offices. I want to acknowledge their pain and their frustration. I also want to acknowledge an old beat cop I met in the mid-'80s when community policing was at its peak in Edmonton, who was able to dismantle a fledgling crime gang by reintroducing to those young boys and young men a volunteer pupil, because those kids had dropped out of high school because they weren't succeeding and they needed additional help. And that same beat cop volunteered in a community justice program, restorative justice program, and that same beat cop left the service on a mental health leave. Policing is hard. Policing asks civil servants to go into the most gruesome of situations and be pros. So I think like all of us, we're torn apart this week, but I wanted to acknowledge all the Dudley and Debbie Do-Rights that I've met on the police service all these years, who do fantastic social work and community work on behalf of all Edmontonians, and at the same time acknowledge that we have racist systems, certainly not just the police. But I wanted to ask you, because I know you had success in Saskatchewan as a police chief in changing the makeup of the police service, Chief McPhee, as far as, so what are we doing, what is the police service doing now around recruitment to better reflect the diversity of the community you serve?
Sure. I want to make a comment, then I'm going to turn over to Deputy Chief Durko, who's, as I said, has been here a while, but he's the new deputy. But Councillor McKean, first of all, thank you for the comments. And second of all, I think you make a very valid point, and you've just made my argument on the school resources officer as well. But that's the whole point. We're getting confused here. Whether it's social or mental health or justice, the change in policing is that we have a role in all of those spaces in relation to community safety and well-being. And that's the whole premise why I think the system needs to be changed. And that, to me, is the future of policing. It's not the economics of policing, it's the future of policing. But Darren, you want to add on the recruiting?
Yes, thanks. Just quickly, Chief McPhee, a big part of our frustration is I think the EPS was leading on progressive community policing in the mid-late 80s, and then it fell back. It changed. And I guess what I'm hearing from you today is a commitment to return to problem-solving, community-based, community partner policing.
125% agree.
And Councillor McCain, if I may, it's written in our new strategic plan, our vision, to be a forward-thinking police service that builds public trust while addressing crime, harm, and disorder. So community is within the chief's structure, it's within the services structure, but public trust is right at the head of our mission and vision.
Thank you.
Just in relation to the question around what are we doing for recruiting diversity in our police service, I'd just like to share we have a recruit academy that spends time with people that are interested in policing, but maybe don't have the education or background to get them through the process to be successful in the selection process. That academy is being recognized nationally now in December in an article in a Police Chief's magazine on the work that we're doing with these communities and spending time in a classroom with them and getting them ready and prepared so that they can have a successful career in policing. And many of them have entered into our recruit training and are being quite successful. I might be able to just use the last recruit class 149, where we hired 32 members. And in relation to diversity, out of those 32 members, 11 of them were women, 9 were from visible minorities, and they have a variety of languages that they speak: Punjabi, Hindi, French, Korean, and so on. There's many languages, but diversity is also in education and their experiences. And many of them have degrees in economics, education, geography, criminology, sociology, and I can go on there as well. So I think we're probably more successful in recruiting diversity than we have been in the past, but it's going to continue to be a focus for us moving forward.
Thank you. Am I out of time, Mr. Mayor?
I'm afraid so, Councillor, but thank you very much. Next up is Councillor Katarina.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and Chief McPhee, thank you very much for your presentation and your sensibilities in this. Having been on the commission twice in my tenure as councillor, and you're the third chief that I've been directly involved with, I guess I could put it that way. I want to thank you for the progression from you and from other chiefs prior to you in moving forward in a progressive sort of way. And without being too specific about this, I know the last number of days, last number of weeks with the circumstances and the events in Minnesota that have pushed this to the forefront, I think we can all agree was deplorable, the circumstances. But I think we can also agree that this has sort of solidified some in lumping everyone together in either you're good or you're bad. And I don't think that the protesters would like to see themselves being categorized that way. And I certainly agree that we cannot lump all police forces and all EPS members in the same vein, in the same light. I think we can all agree on that. And knowing the work that you've done up to now and that you will continue to do is absolutely necessary and agreed to and commendable. One thing that I haven't heard and I would like to know what's being done for our EPS members. And if I could, Chief, and then let you respond to this, without naming any names, I'd like to read something to you and then get your response. I've been a police officer since 1995. Never have I felt such hatred towards my profession as in recent weeks. And it hits me, and it hits me to my core. That said, I will continue to move forward knowing that the majority of officers do this job the right way and for the right reasons. So as one side would not like to be lumped in altogether, the other side, I think, needs some consideration as well, too. And the other side, I mean EPS service. And the majority of members now taking the brunt of the hatred that's being directed towards them. And do we have anything in place in order to support our members, EPS members, with this type of feeling that they are having?
You know, Councillor Katarina, first of all, I want to thank you for acknowledging that. I know it takes a lot of courage and face criticism in that, and I think this is really what this is about. Just a couple things on that. I'm going to get Deputy Chief Durko. We are doing stuff for them. but I've been in policing a long time. I've never seen it like this, and you're right. It's the few, and it's not acceptable for the few, and we're dealing with that. I just want to also acknowledge we are the first in Canada as any police service, don't even be new, that came out publicly and denounced Minneapolis. That's because we're going in a different direction, and that's really why I think it's important that we just keep going. But I'm going to turn it over to answer your question to DC Durko, because we have a great program.
Thank you for that question. We have an employee family assistance program that is available to our members, and this involves a lot of counseling and group therapy if they need. But approximately 20% of our sworn members utilize this preferred counseling service. And this high utilization is a good indicator of acceptance and value seen by our members, because I know early on in my career, we didn't have these types of supports. And the utilization of this Homeward Health Family Assistance Program is also utilized by our civilians, and approximately 15% of those also access this service. So it's not just our sworn members, it's our civilian members that are feeling this as well. This also demonstrates good use of our program. Those are just percentages, but numbers, we conduct between 200 to 300 mandatory wellness evaluations. And when we say these are mandatory, these are for people that work in high stress. Like policing is stressful, but also positions within policing are equally more stressful. And we have mandatory wellness and evaluations for these members where they meet a psychologist and talk about what they're going through. And this is on an annual basis. I think we're probably some of the leaders. I know a lot of police agencies contact us on a regular basis to see what we're doing and how we're working with our members. And we'll continue to evolve and advance this program because it's so important. The health of our members is important because if they're in a good space, they are there to be able to serve our communities.
Thank you. Next up is Councillor Cartmel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Chair Ruth and Chief McPhee, for being here today. I really appreciate all of the information you've offered, Chief McPhee. An underlying thread for me in all of this is the matter of trust, and it seems fundamental to all of this is that those that interact with the police service, there's some that have a varying level of trust. And I don't want to trivialize anybody's experience. I can only speak for my own, but I know that if I encounter a police officer, if I'm stopped in traffic, or if I see someone at an event, that if they're challenging me, I can trust that they're challenging me because they think I've erred. But that sense of trust is not shared with everyone. And it seems to me that it is that very first interaction with a citizen, between a citizen and a member of the police force, that we have a fundamental trust issue. That's not the only issue, but it seems to me that it starts there. So I have a couple of questions around this. The first is, can you describe what the police service's use of force policy is, and perhaps a little bit of the training that goes around that?
Yeah, I'm going to, I mean, it's use of force training module is pretty in-depth. I'll get DC Durko to give you some of the highlights in relation to that and a lot of the training that goes with it.
So our use of force, or what we refer to as reasonable officer response, is one of our greatest challenges in maintaining the confidence and, as you spoke, trust of our communities and trust of our members. The expectation has always been there, but it's never been this high. Reasonable officer response training is directly linked to the officer's professional use of force. Officers are trained to use these tactics to de-escalate the given situation by ensuring that they're lawfully placed and that they use tactical communication skills. Other tactical considerations may be used. Obviously, it's on a continuum, and as these levels increase, officers may need to engage. They use, additionally, we try to do it on a continuum basis and get control by what we refer to as empty hand soft, like using pressure points, joint locks, and that kind of thing. We also look at, we call ESO, it's environmental subject factors and officer factors. Environmental can include, like, what's the location? Are we in confined spaces? Cover, weather, lighting. Subject factors obviously is the age, size, gender of the person, how many subjects are involved, what training they may have, their history, criminal history, their mental state, alcohol, drugs. There's a lot of factors that are in consideration, but most importantly, what are the officer factors? What's their training? How many number of officers are there? What condition are they in? Fitness, exhaustion? Do they have any injuries? Prior knowledge of the subject? And
So perhaps, I'm sorry, sir, perhaps let me stop you there because I do have another question. The sense I get from your answer is that there's a lot of discussion or training or thought put into, where and when do officers make physical contact or perhaps less than that. I'm wondering if there's a need to go one step higher and talk about the whole triage process when a member of the force interacts with a citizen. Chief McPhee, you've talked about how we have 60 social agencies, but we don't have a lot of outcomes to show for those agencies. You've said that there's a ton of money in the system, that it's not a financial piece. I'm wondering if there's an element of this that is a triage piece, that is, having the right person responding at the very first moment, perhaps without a uniform, perhaps without a police car, those kinds of concepts.
Yes, and I just want to make sure I make a point on one thing. We need those social agencies, and I don't want to ever think that we don't, but we and us and the social agencies, because we're the ones that handle the calls for service. Let's face it, there's still a meth issue in this city, and those are violent. And, no disrespect, because I got the admiration for social workers. We're not going to send a social worker, and we don't know who's on meth. And most of our calls for these calls are coming sometimes from EMS or sometimes from other agencies. So to your point, this is what we're working on right now. Can we find a space, which we're close, working with, hopefully with the Oilers Entertainment Group, who've been a great partner, and others, to try to find a building that we can start to put these folks in one place to take services to the citizens, not for citizens to come and gather and accumulate, but how do we focus and how do we measure on taking stuff out of the system? The system right now, and I've been in government, for a while, and mostly what we measure right now is what we're taking in. If you measure, let's go start with police. How many calls do you take? How many people are in custody? If you start with hospitals, how many patients have come in? If you start with child apprehension, how many kids have you taken into custody? If you start with everything else, it's what you take in. The whole fundamental system needs to be aligned, and it needs to be a focus on and measured by who you get out of the system, not who you put in. And I think we can play a lead role with our partners in doing that, because that's why we're building the metrics, the measurement, and that's why we want to get underneath them, because we train well, but unfortunately a lot of them don't get the training, and collectively we need to train together.
And one last thing I would like to add to that is we also come to present before our commission. We're accountable to the public to speak about those outcomes. So we outline what our corporate performance framework is going to be, and then we're measured annually against that as well, so that there is a measure of accountability.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you. I'm going to start on the reforms to the Police Act with a question for you, Chief. I think you said that you wanted to see some reforms with respect to how police misconduct is treated, but I don't know if you went, I don't recall you going into detail on this. Could you give us a sense of how you'd like to see the status quo changed in the new Police Act?
Sure. I mean, there's lots of changes that we'd like, but just in reference to that one, I think public complaints on police, about police, should be held by an independent investigative body. Or an expansion of ASERT or an ASERT-like type thing, which has some independence. So it takes the police out of the equation, and we have somebody, and obviously with community representation and obviously the expertise and the skill sets to assess these and to work at these things independently and differently. And I think that's one thing that, Black Lives Matter mentioned, and I think it's also one thing that many of our minority communities have mentioned before. But, you know, that independence and oversight is a good thing, and that's got to start with the Police Act.
And Chief, if I may.
All right.
Sorry, Councillor.
Yep, go ahead. Yep,
We'll be
go ahead.
actively reaching out to the community to work on what the art of the possible could look like on independent or increased independent oversight when it comes to police complaints. So for those who are willing and wanting to work, as the Chief has said, we will be actively looking, because this is something that we believe is necessary, and this is something that we believe that can be a win-win for the citizens of Edmonton.
Thank you. And while I have you, Anina, you mentioned something called the social determinants of justice. And I admit I haven't heard that term before. I've heard social determinants of health, but not justice. So could you speak to that a little bit more?
Absolutely. They're almost one and the same, and that's the issue. When it comes to overrepresentation, there is a lot of risk factors that plague and affect marginalized communities. So rather than looking at things through just a lens of solely race or orientation or anything like that, we need to look at the root cause, and that's why we're reorganizing our Chiefs Community Committee, Chiefs Community Council, to start actually working at attacking those root cause issues to see what we can do to actually change the game there.
All right. Thank you for that, Anina. So to Chief McPhee, I think Councillor Cartmel started to get at this, is that we have a lot of partner agencies. The officers themselves go through quite a training regimen. You've said this isn't a money problem. We're talking about upstream solutions. There's a lot of money right now going into poverty reduction and triaging the homelessness issue in our city. I don't know if you could tell me how much per year, but how many years of funding, in your opinion, could create an enduring long-term change, like proportional to that funding that we see annually going into poverty? And all these programs that address the downstream issues, what are we looking at in terms of I don't want to say a one-time solution, but a one-time investment in a sustainable way to address this?
You know, can I answer that with a bit of a question and a bit of a different spin? Because I think you're on to a really key point there. When you look at poverty, we've got a strategy or a committee to reduce poverty. We've got a strategy to reduce homelessness. We've got a strategy to reduce mental health. We've got a strategy to reduce addictions. We've got a strategy to reduce domestic violence. We've got a strategy, and the list goes on. And they all exist in this city. Most of the people in every strategy that need the service are the same. Why don't we look at the strategy for the marginalized community and ask them what it is that we can get them into a better place? Why don't we work with the minority communities and help them build the agenda with us? We keep throwing money at strategies, and it's not necessarily from the city level. It generally comes from a federal level, and it downflows, and everybody stands up another organization to address this particular issue, where we haven't put the people in charge. And this is the problem when it goes cross-ministry. It's no one system can solve it. And I think you're on exactly on the crux of this. Policing can't solve social issues. But I can honestly 120% tell you that if they're not part of the solution, it isn't going to work. If you don't have public health there, it isn't going to work. If you don't have a portion of social services, if you don't have mental health embedded in it and trauma, it won't work. That's the missing link. In relation to funding, I would even hate to venture to guess how much money is spent in this space in the city of Edmonton. When I was in government and I went across Canada, approximately 6 ministries spent 80 to 90% of every provincial budget, and you know what they were: health, social services, education, justice, advanced ed, and the employment arm of the economy. Yep, there's 20-some ministries. That's the point. I think you're exactly right. The money, without a coordinating function or a coordinating body, is just funding stuff in isolation, and as a result, our outcomes are extremely diminished.
All right. I think I'm out of time, so I'm going to have to leave it there.
I'm afraid so. Thank you very much. Councillor Zadok is next.
Thank you very much. I'll start by just saying to the Chief McPhee, I'm glad we hired you, and I think you're the right person to be leading EPS right now. Not that that was under any doubt, in my opinion, but I think just today you've demonstrated great leadership and vision, something that I've known as well, and with your supporting team. But we're here to be critical, and I'm gonna jump on something in your presentation. It's a lot of your answers or the material presented. It made the case that we were already on the trajectory that would address all the concerns or most of the concerns that have been brought to light in the past few weeks. So that's good that we had the foresight to be aiming in that direction. But can you highlight what, if any, departures in thinking have emerged since we've heard loud and clear from the public in Edmonton and seen demonstrations across North America or the Western world about policing? So what you presented sounded good. Just, I want to know what, if anything, has changed in the past few weeks.
You know what? Well, it's been the past few weeks. Let's talk COVID too. Vision 2020, which we'll get to you if you haven't seen it, has 75 recommendations to reform the Edmonton Police Service. The strategic plan accompanies that. The strategic direction and the measurement and business plan is how we're going to measure it, all of which, we can present you with. The bottom line is, and I use this as a bit of an analogy, is that we need to jail the people we're afraid of and not the ones we're mad at. And, that's a bit of a statement, but there's a criminal element in this city that are overrepresenting and disproportionately representing recontact in the justice system. We also need to hold them accountable. But the most of Edmonton's costs and most of what we're seeing in the city, and the police service is a good look at how your social fiber of your city is, because the calls for service generally, in a large part, we're taking. The social fiber in relation to the city is disproportionately driving costs to not only our budget, to the city's budget, and to many others' budget, and probably a downturn in some other budgets in some businesses. With that said, we have the right talent in the room to address this. So what we need to address this, which is what our plan is to do, is we need to play the leadership role in partnership with our communities and go straight at it with our communities, though, not on top of our communities. You know what? It's part of the reason we build a Community Solutions Accelerator, and the list goes on. So I know you'll have probably another question, but I can get you way more information, and we can post some of this stuff to you as well.
And Chief, if I may, one of the questions was about what has been a market change since the demonstrations and the protest, and it's what we're all seeing today. We talk about racism now. We acknowledge systemic racism. We acknowledge that this happens in our community, and we weren't doing that openly before. It was left to groups like Black Lives Matters or Indigenous groups to be speaking about this, but now we're all in a place that we're talking about this. This has to be a catalyst for change, and we have to work together to move there.
And it needs to be a living room chat. Systemic racism exists, and the chat needs to be, what are we collectively going to do about it? And then how are we going to measure it? And when are we going to start? And if it's later than today, we have the wrong channel on.
So then, to summarize what I just heard there, the police service has already changed as a result of the demonstrations, at least in the way that information is presented and contemplated publicly. Is that correct, yes or no? Or, sorry, I don't mean to say yes or no and force you into a binary answer.
We're well on our way to making more communication available to the public. That's another one of our strategic goals. But have we changed? I guess we've been responding to a lot of things, and we want to make sure that people are getting their answers. So we're trying to be quicker.
Thanks. And my last question will be if you've identified any quick fixes. And I get that also is a bit unfair in some ways, because a lot of these complex solutions don't require quick fixes, but just given that there's an appetite to see some type of change, either symbolic or more structural, and of course with the ultimate goal of reducing, eliminating the systemic racism that has been identified, but just has there been any quick fixes identified, or are we on the long-term trajectory as outlined earlier? Which,
Sorry.
yeah.
No, Police Act, you know, a lot of the things that I spoke about, you know, pushing ahead with the body-worn videos, the piece on the partnerships, the piece on the connection with the communities, things that I mentioned, the redundancies in service, I mentioned dispatch center calls for service, where all of these things is, it all starts with a call. And if you reverse engineer a call, you have to have the intake right, or you'll never get the response right. And so we're really focusing on the intake to ensure we try to get the right response. And then the last, or one of the other quick changes is we're going to adopt a piece that when somebody feels aggrieved or harmed and it's went through a discipline process, we need to follow up with that individual if they so wish to see how we repair the relationships. Because that person, although maybe it's not solved in a PSB or a complaints branch, because it might not be something that is founded, but there's still a hurt relationship there, and we need to get that outside of professional standards, and we need to follow up with people, and we need to be committed to do it.
Thank you very much. No more questions.
Thank you. Is Councillor Banga, the ranking acting mayor, on deck here? Okay.
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Please take the chair then.
Second.
Chief, people tell me all the time that I've got the hardest job in town, and I usually say, no, the police chief does. But I'm going to add the chair of the police commission ahead of me in terms of the difficulty of the things that you have to juggle clearly. Where I want to start is that, as you know, whenever I can, I attend the recruit graduation ceremonies and have a chance to welcome an increasingly, but still perhaps not diverse enough set of recruits to the service to support safety and positive intervention for Edmontonians. And one of the points that's reflected on are a set of principles around policing, and there are 9, and I don't want to put you on the spot to name them all, it's not a test. But I think the one that brings us here, and I want your reaction to this, is the one that says the ability of the police to perform their duties is dependent upon public approval of police actions. I got 10,000 emails and was out on the lawn at the Ledge with many thousands of people who are telling their elected officials that they do not approve of police actions. And I think nobody approves of what happened to George Floyd. But then we've also seen a whole bunch of examples, recent and less recent, of excessive use of force by our own police service on our own citizens. And all of that coming at the same time is impacting public approval of police actions. So my first question for you in that context is, what specific recommendations do you have for us for change to the accountability systems for public complaints and officer accountability for the use of excessive force, particularly as it relates to the Police Act and recommendations we might quickly make to the expedited Solicitor General review of the Police Act with respect to ACERT and other mechanisms that are there, public complaints mechanisms that are there. How can those be strengthened so that we can improve public confidence around police action?
You know, I'll give Justin Crickler to give you some statistics in relation to the percentage of police investigations in relation to different categories. We have a pretty good breakdown of that. I can maybe can talk about that. And some of that, 2018 to 2019, our use of force is actually reduced by 19%. But there's another piece of this. The professionalism, I think, is equally as important as the use of force. And the professionalism is the relationship. The professionalism in the interaction, it's your customer service. And that particular part went from 23% to 34%. And some of that obviously will reflect different things in relation to how we handle stuff. But most importantly, being a professional is more than you. It's about holding yourself to a higher standard, representing your profession. The profession has taken a hit here. For us, what we need to do as EPS to obviously look at that is really focus at Police Act, meaningful change from the ability to hold people accountable, but that's just the piece of it. The bigger piece here that you nailed is the public confidence and trust. And that means that we need to get out of a police car, we need to get in a room, or online, I guess, right now, in front of a video, to actually listen to our people. I've been a big believer, I think I said this again in my interview, I'm starting to relive that now. 2 ears, one mouth. Listening's more than waiting for your turn to talk. And, you know, I just want to also highlight, though, some of what you've seen. You saw the videos as I did, as most of us did at the protest. You saw how angry people, or some people, were at our police service. They stood there, they took it. We had one individual throw a flagpole through a front windshield of a police car. We had another one got, you know, punched in the head. We can't lose that. We have to stay restrained, and we have to realize that people are frustrated and they're mad because of a period of time. So we need to put the time back into and lead that reparation and restoration reconciliation.
So the other thing I want to jump in on here, and it goes a little bit to the example that was before us of the two members posed with an individual in some distress who had been detained, and that was posted dehumanizingly on Instagram. And that's been widely condemned. What is the training and expectation around bystander accountability among police, so that if one is doing something wrong, the others who are there are not just encouraged, but enabled, resourced, and incented, and held themselves accountable not to be bystanders in any violation of the dignity of an Edmontonian they serve?
Yeah, it's a great point, and one that came out in a video long before that, and something that we do train of. We actually talked about it as early as 2 days ago. How are we going to reinforce? Because as you know, whether you're playing a sport or whatever, sometimes you're amped up and you're jacked up, and it's not only the responsibility of the officer, it's the other people to do their job and to make sure they alleviate the situation. As far as the picture on Instagram, I want to make it very clear, that's not acceptable. That's clearly not acceptable. And that's my job to hold it accountable, and we'll make decisions once the investigation is done. And I want to also be clear, giving somebody, you know, by the Police Act, a few hours pay or whatever you need to do, here's an example that I think at some point community could play a part in fixing this. There's healing circles, there's different ways, there's putting people in front of the community to answer to their actions. We got to look at, and I don't want to use this example, but we got to use this more often. We just did it in our own police service with the Dan Woodhull death to try to put closure after 5 years. We learned a lot. The conversation that I had with two of the people that had a complaint with us, where they were visibly passionate and upset, there's a lesson there to learn. And I think my commitment needs to be focused on balancing that equation and repairing the relationship, but I don't want to ever waver on the accountability piece to make sure it doesn't happen again. And that's got to be our focus. And those are some of the things in the Police Act that we'll be looking for in addition to.
Well, thank you, Chief. I've got a whole bunch more questions about street checks, but we're going to have to pick that one up another time because I'm out of time here, unfortunately. Is there anybody else with questions on the first round?
You turn in the chair first.
Thank you. Thank you. So I understand there is a possible motion that Councillor Knack and I have been working on. I'm not sure who's got the latest set of wording on it. So maybe just give us 2 minutes here so we can make sure we've got the right version of wording here for a motion, not to end the debate, but to structure it going forward. And the proposal would be that we get a motion on the floor. This meeting runs out of steam in 10 minutes. We would have an opportunity, hopefully, to refer the motion on the floor to a public hearing would be my recommendation, to be held Monday. virtually, though we'll figure out how we can, in light of pandemic, hear on the motion, and then feedback from the public, and then also then have an opportunity to ask further questions before making final decisions on the motion, both of the service, the commission, and administration, and any procedural or legal advice that's required before making a decision on a motion. Sorry, let me just make sure we've got the right version of it here. So that's been emailed to the clerk. And to members of council, so you should all have that in your inbox. So, Councillor Knack, do you have the current wording?
I do, yeah, I have it. So if you'd like, I can read it out.
Go ahead.
Okay, so forgive it, it's a long motion here, and there's probably more that will need to be added. So number one, that administration A, work with the commission to bring forward analysis on how many calls for service are driven by mental health, addictions, homelessness, or other social and public health factors, and analysis for how many calls could be better responded to by partners through the scale-up of existing programs like REACH's 24/7 Crisis Diversion Program or new programs with service packages for such programs for consideration as part of the fall supplemental operating budget adjustment. B, approach the City of Calgary and other cities with police services in Alberta to jointly analyze the cracks in the system in Alberta's cities that drive higher crime, disorder, and demand for reactive community services, including policing to inform the above. C, engage external subject matters experts to bring a report summarizing the trend and change models generally described under divest and defund, including the recently approved Minneapolis decisions and any Canadian contextual examples and the various demonstrated and proposed change models, including reference to the change model articulated in the End Poverty Edmonton Roadmap and the plan to end homelessness. D, that A, B, and C come back to committee in September. E, informed by the above, that budget amendments for council's consideration for fall supplemental operating budget adjustment to freeze the 2021 police budget at 2020 levels, and that the Edmonton Police Service funding formula policy C604 be suspended pending review and reframing as a Edmonton community safety funding policy informed by the analysis directed above. F, report urgently on options to better hold transit peace officers accountable for excessive use of force, including an arm's length oversight mechanism and advice on further submissions to the Alberta Solicitor Generals on the Police Act. 2, that the Mayor write to the Solicitor General regarding the pending Expedited Police Act review. A, advocating that an independent mechanism like ACERT be given mandate for handling all public complaints about police conduct. B, that similar mechanisms for police officer oversight and accountability be strengthened in provincial legislation. And C, clarity of provincial law and policy with respect to carding and street check policy and how this will be, and any findings and implementation plans arising from the province's recent review that can be shared. 3, that the Mayor write to the Edmonton Police Commission asking for the following. A, to provide advice to council on EPC's perspective on opportunities to strengthen the public complaints about police conduct, particularly around excessive force complaints as part of the Police Act review. B, to invite participation in the work outlined in Part 1, including proposals prior to budget for SMART on community safety and well-being, changes to policy, funding, programs, and partnerships. C, to hold a public hearing and public inquiry on the EPS street check policies based on community concerns and informal carding. D, to provide information to council on dash and body cam implementation pathways given federal announcements, including costs and timelines.
Mr. Mayor, I am happy to second this with the understanding that for the public that this is the first step to system change.
Thank you, Councillor Paquette. Now, we have 5 minutes left. I accept the motion, but clearly we can't get into debate. And my suggestion is that there is a whole further step of Q&A with officials about implications of these proposals. And even more importantly than that, there is another step of hearing from community in the form of a non-statutory public hearing. My initial suggestion was that we attempt to do that next week. Administration has some things to work through around reopen and the logistics of what we can do virtually and what under the rules the province has just announced yesterday we might be able to do less virtually. And so the timing of this is a little bit difficult. So we do need to refer the motion on the floor to be dealt with at a non-statutory public hearing, and the direction that ideally we could set a time for that today, and it needs to be as soon as possible. But logistically, given the pandemic, that is very difficult to nail down. I was hoping Monday, but I don't know if that's going to be feasible technically. So I do need a motion to refer the motion on the floor to the Mayor and Administration to work to schedule a non-statutory public hearing to hear from the public on the motion on the floor.
I'll move that. Make that
Thank you,
referral.
Councillor Walters, seconded by Councillor Banga. Okay, so referral is on the floor before us, and I think the rationale is self-explanatory. I do note that we had a healthy second round of questions based on the Commission and Chief's presentation, and that is, there's certainly more to discuss from that, as well as arising from the motion that Councillor Knack has put forward. And so now what we need to do then is vote on the referral to, and if we can just get the, and if we could add the words to be convened as soon as possible, and we'll advertise it with due notice. If that's friendly, Councillor Walters? Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, just as I don't know if it's a point of order, but just to catch it, I think it may be. Under 2C, and Councillor Knack stumbled over this bit, I actually think there is something that's been inadvertently left out after how this will be, comma. So if we're going to refer it, I know we can clean that up, but if we're also going to send this out publicly, it'd be good to get it cleaned up beforehand. It feels like something's been left out of that sentence.
After the word be.
Yeah, there is something, before we refer it, if there's a friendly amendment to the underlying motion on the floor for clarity, that's a good catch, Councillor Henderson. I think we could just take out "and how this will be," because I think it was, there was a previous version where it started with the feedback on the province's review and how that will affect and should be interpreted. So I think if we just take out the words "and how this will be," so that it reads clarity of provincial law and policy with respect to carding and street check policy, and any findings and implementation plans arising from the province's recent review that can be shared.
Great, thank you.
Okay, I think that's friendly. Is there no objection to that adjustment to the underlying motion on the floor? Okay. So let the public debate, let's vote, I suppose, on referral.
So can I just clarify, you're referring this back to us to find a date at which point there can be a non-statutory public hearing on the motion on the floor?
As soon as possible.
As soon as possible.
Yeah. Okay. please vote on referral.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor.
Sorry, who's,
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. I was just going to briefly comment if I could. But I also recognize the time, so it's. I
sorry,
understand.
on referral?
Yeah.
Okay, no, that's in order. I just need a motion to extend to complete today's business.
So moved.
Thank you, Councillor Banga.
Second.
Seconded by Councillor Knack. I'm just going to seek unanimous consent to extend to complete. I have to call for notices and see if there are any other subsequents, but I think we're just about done here. Is there any objection to extension to complete? No?
So, Mr. Mayor, are you going to allow us all to comment on the motion before us then?
Only on referral.
Right, I'm a little frustrated by the suggestion that one councillor wanted to comment, to be honest.
And Mr. Mayor, I agree with Councillor McKean. This referral is strictly a referral. Let's get on with this. So I object to the referral, to Councillor Knapp.
Well, it is a debatable motion, and I didn't give him an opportunity to introduce the motion, is the tension. So strictly speaking, unless you wish to pass a motion barring him from speaking, I must hear from him at least on referral, if it is his will to speak. And given that I did not give him an opportunity to introduce the motion beyond reading it in, that strictly speaking can be deferred to the next to debate on the motion. But there is a tension there. So I hear that if one is allowed to speak, all would like to speak, and that is fair. So I would counsel, not that it's my place to do so, Councillor Knack, to be judicious in any framing comments you have on referral. Go ahead.
Well, thank you. The only thing I just wanted to state, Mr. Mayor, about the referral is that, again, the motion that's going to be referred can definitely be tweaked and amended and changed based off public feedback. This was the starting point in working with you, and also Councillor Paquette talking about some of this. So that's just what I wanted to say out loud, which is that I support the referral because this will allow for a full review of what's written in that and adjustments and amendments based off what comes forward in the public hearing. So I felt I should have said that. So my apologies to hold up everyone. That's it.
Well, thank you for those comments. That's helpful. Is there any other debate on referral? Not hearing any, then please vote on referral of the motion on the floor to a non-statutory public hearing to be convened as soon as possible.
And those
Yes.
I have one verbal, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, from Tim.
I think I heard Councillor McKean verbally as well.
Yep. And Councillor Nicol, did I hear you vote in the affirmative?
Yes, you did.
Thank you.
Do you have all the votes?
No, I do not. I have 12. I have 3 verbal and 9 on the Vobot, and now I have 13.
Well, I might have voted twice. Just double check.
Sorry, to confirm, Councillor Nicol was in the affirmative. Yep.
Yes. Yeah. So you have 13 now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Please display the vote on referral. That's carried. Okay, so stay tuned for further discussion there. That refers the item itself as well, 6.5. So we are done for now, but far from done the conversation that started here today. So, and hearing from our public will be the next step. To help clarify the many different interpretations of the many different suggestions that are out there for change in this area. So there's a lot more to say, but I really must stop there. So what's left now is notices of motion. Councillor Walters.
Thank you. At the next regular City Council meeting, I will make the following motion. This is for something completely different and much less interesting. That administration provide a report on the considerations and steps required to create a bylaw limiting the use of wood roofs in Edmonton, and particularly the use of wood roofs in neighborhoods adjacent to ravines or forests, as well as offering any available commentary on the legislation applicable to wood roofs. And also that, secondly, motion to be made at the next regular City Council meeting that administration provide a report on the following: how the city manages and responds to citizen reports about damaged infrastructure both owned by the City of Edmonton and our utility partners, and on how we inventory all utility infrastructure, both City of Edmonton owned and non-City of Edmonton owned, and suggested improvements for tracking, managing, and maintaining this inventory. Thank you.
Could we get a copy of that, please, Councillor Walters?
Yeah, I've emailed them, I think, but I will do it again.
Thank you. Notice is received for those. Councillor Zadok.
Thank you. At the next regular City Council meeting, I'll move that administration prepare a report on city-owned golf courses to include 1, an outline of yearly revenues and operating costs over the last 5 full golf seasons, and 2, an analysis of the pros and cons of operating municipal golf courses, including a jurisdictional scan of what other municipalities, such as Calgary, are doing to ensure adequate access to golf for residents.
Thank you. Are there any other notices of motion? Not hearing any, then today's council meeting is adjourned. Thank you.